how first of all, I'm just really happy to be talking to you because we've been following each other on Twitter for a while, and I've always wanted to talk to you, and so I finally am. And when I get back to Ukraine, you're one of the first people I want to see. You
Uh,
know,
Thank you, Terrell. That's terrific that we make it, and I really appreciate and I admire your job on supporting and standing with Ukraine, especially as someone from who is not Ukrainian. This is always something terrific to see, and I would be very happy to meet you when you are back in Ukraine.
yeah, I am too, and you've all been in my thoughts for a while because these bastard Russians are really trying to wipe you all off the face of the earth. And we've seen these recent missile attacks, and they've been really, really, really aggressive. And it's probably not going to slow down with these terrorist attacks that happen near Moscow. But before we get into all these heavy questions about Ukrainian security and NATO and all that, I always ask my the people I interview about their mental health. I want to ask about you because you all have been experiencing these massive attacks, these missile attacks. And so, how are you doing, Maria? And how do you take care of yourself as you continue to tell the story about Ukraine and how it's defending itself against this Russian aggression?
A great question, Terrell. Actually, mental health is one of the biggest issues for Ukrainians now because it's been more than 2 years, and people get exhausted because yeah, you get adapted and you get resilient, but on the other hand. It gets to you. So, like living every day under the threat of being killed is not an easy thing. So this also this includes everything. And for myself, I try to keep some kind of routines, like doing things that I did before the war regularly and as much as I can to somehow distract. But it's not easy because the first thing in the morning I get up, I start immediately looking at the phone, what has been hit, who was hurt, messaging friends and colleagues around Ukraine if there was a missile attack, and they're happening quite frequently. So I try to do sports. I try to go outside, read a book, but it's not easy. And there is a special program run by president's wife Olena Zelenska on mental health specifically, and they give people advices on how to better cope with what is surrounding them with this everyday living in the war. So it's tough, but people do it, and I try to do it as well.
I'm happy to hear that because what a lot of Americans don't know is excuse me, how do people function during a war, right? Because we only see the trenches, we only see the tanks and the heavy armor on the front lines, but we don't go to Kiev often or in the West and see how people in the civilian cities go about their lives, which all things considered, I find to be very, very incredible, right? I'll never forget when the first few days of the war, there is a track outside of the kitchen window where I was staying, and I saw a guy taking laps around the track, literally in the first few days of the war. And it was, and also even when the war, the first day, I remember there was this nightclub that we were passing by early in the morning, and the club had just let out people, and people were still there. Now, of course, all of these horrific war crimes and things were happening, but I think it also speaks to how humongous the country is, right? And so, even though the missiles can hit anywhere in Ukraine, there's like this resilience that happens, and this just going along with your life at the same time, that if you're not there, you don't understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. You cannot postpone your life all the time. This is what I was doing a lot. So I was all the time not like doing something because I was thinking, well, when the war will be over, I will do it. But then at some point you realize that you can't all the time live like in this situation when you postpone to after the war, when the war lasts for years. So people get married, people go to the restaurants to meet their friends. A woman just gave birth to a baby during the last missile attack on Kiev. So life goes on, but inside the war. And you are completely right about the that the world doesn't see the stories of the remarkable Ukrainians who do their everyday jobs, especially in the frontline areas where they like there is still post offices functioning where they wear where they wear body armor to bring pensions to the elderly, the hospitals near the front lines, the small shops, small pharmacies, which are vital for people there. But no one from these workers ever was thinking that they will work in the West and they will have to prepare for missile attacks. But they adapted and they live now in this situation because there is you can't just stop living, you have to continue.
Yeah, that's something that really, really stood out to me when I was actually collecting these videos and sending them off to these major networks. The things that really took off really surprised me, like going shopping for bread, or going to a restaurant or something like that. I thought it was something really small and insignificant, but it got hundreds of thousands of views because people really want people they were just fascinated by it, and I think it's really important to show this other side of Ukraine as well because I feel like it humanizes people. Not to say that people need to be humanized, but in this media landscape where we don't get to talk to people every day and we're not on the ground, I think it's important to see people live through this. But I want to get to these missile attacks. And even though this was the largest barrage, from my understanding, that's happened since the full scale invasion of 2022, this is not uncommon. Russia has constantly targeted civilian locations throughout this war. I just want to ask you, why does Russia do this, even though many of the targets are not participating in the war?
Exactly. So you are completely right, Terrell. And from the very first day of the invasion, what was the most shock for people, especially like living in the cities near Russia, like Kharkiv, where I am originally from, is Russia hitting civilian buildings and Russia trying to kill civilians. This was the most shocking thing that you can imagine. Why would like neighboring country do this? So the answer to this question is because Putin openly says there is no such country as Ukraine, and he actually wants to eliminate Ukraine. This is his goal. He says that there should be only Russia, and this is all Russian territory, and everyone who is not going along with this has to be killed. And this is Russian goal. And the more war goes on, the more aggressive Russia becomes because they understand they understand Ukraine is not going to surrender, and their aggression and missile attacks don't help. So killing civilians is now praised on Russian Telegram channels, on Russian social media, because they say that the more Ukrainians will be killed, the better will be for Russia, which is that's just terrifying and a horrible thing. But this is what Russia brings to Ukraine.
You know, I know this because I subscribe to Dmitry Medvedev's Telegram, not because I like it,
You're
but
brave.
because, well, yes, okay, but I do this because it's my go to each time someone suggests that maybe Ukraine needs to pursue a peace agreement with Russia. And I think that the word peace, even the premise of that question is not appropriate because Ukraine didn't do anything to create the conflict. So when you, as a Ukrainian, hear Russian state television, which is pretty much the PR arm of the Kremlin, say things like the fewer Ukrainians that exist, the better for you. This is like ethnic extermination, what they're saying.
Absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
genocidal language. What's your response to people who talk about maybe a peace agreement needs to be pursued?
There is like nothing, it has nothing to do with language, and this always was the just Russian pretext. And Russian speakers were never discriminated or are not discriminated in Ukraine. So this is all like completely like complete disinformation and lies from Russia. And this is
You're a Russian
genocidal
speaker.
war. Yeah, yeah. Like Kharkiv is the biggest. Kharkiv, Odessa are the largest Russian speaker cities. I like normally officially I speak Ukrainian to show the identity and unity of Ukraine, but in Kharkiv I would speak Russian to people on the street. So that's like always very funny to hear Russians saying about like how Russian speakers are discriminated in Ukraine and how they have to protect them, and then they bomb Russian-speaking cities like Kharkiv, Odessa, Zaporizhia, and others. So this is a ridiculous thing, and actually it works. It works like on the contrary. The more they attack, the more people start speaking Ukrainian, showing their identity. So it's like working on the contrary. And to your question, as how do I feel? This is horrible to see, and actually. Even when Russia invaded, like started the war in 2014, and they started the war in Donbass, they occupied Crimea. I was not believing that they will start attacking with missiles sleeping cities in Ukraine. So this is something hard to imagine, even after what they have done already before in Syria and Georgia. I was always hoping that this will not happen, but this is happening, and they're not going to stop. The recent Russian attack was on critical infrastructure, on energy, and Kharkiv is still in a partial blackout. So they, for in Kharkiv, for example, they hit 5 electricity substations, trying to completely cut off the city of power. This means also water and internet, because nothing is working without power. There is no public transportation in the city. So this is like a pure genocidal war, where after Ukraine strikes, for example, oil refineries in the territory of Russia. Russians propagandists, including Medvedev, say that now it's time to bomb Ukrainians with nukes. So, like this is always was on their agenda, and this is why I always say that the only way is to Russian militarily defeat is the only way to win for Ukraine, because otherwise there is nothing, like no kind of negotiations or talk can be done, because Russia will only use this time if we give them this time. So we don't have this option at all, because we have already seen this after 2014, and they never stopped, and they are not going to stop, because this is the goal of Putin. He wants to restore the empire. And what peace talks would you do with the accused war criminal? He will only, try to fool you around and go further.
No, definitely. And speaking about this whole thing of Russian speakers, I remember being in Odessa last summer, and I use Russian. Even though I'm learning Ukrainian now, I go and I speak Russian in the east and the south. It's never a problem. And I remember speaking to a guy who was he supports his father in raising money for the Ukrainian military, etc. And he was talking about language, right? He was talking in English, and then when he couldn't get his point across, he would switch to Russian. But he was talking about Ukrainian identity and how important it is to him while speaking in Russian,
Yeah, that's
right?
true. But
Right?
yeah,
And I just found it to be an interesting exchange. It's a video that's on my YouTube channel, and it was fascinating to me. And everybody was speaking freely in Russian language about how their Ukrainian identity, how they reconnected with it even stronger, because Russians, they said, were trying to wipe them out, and they said that that was the thing that made them go back to their Ukrainian roots, go back to their Ukrainian identity, simply because Russia was insisting that it doesn't exist. And when I went to Zaporizhia, which was recently hit hard with the hydro plant, particularly, I was invited to a tourism their tourism center, because they saw me on Instagram in my stories, and they said, "Why don't you come by and we'll show you around?" And it was really incredible, because all these people said, "Well, we spoke Russian freely. It's not a problem." Again, these are all Russian speaking Ukrainians. We had no problem with it. But then after 2014, their words to me were literally their words: "Fuck Russia." Those are their words.
yeah,
Like, to me, those are their words. And Russia sucks. And they the way that they said it to me, and this all on camera, they were just basically saying, "We want you to tell the rest of the world this is how we feel." We were fine. We had no problem. It was a little bit different. But then it was almost as like Putin had the reverse effect, right? That the more I oppress you in your Ukrainian identity, the more Russian you'll want to be. But the total opposite happened. And I experienced that every single time I go and I do stories in southern and in Eastern Russia, in Eastern Ukraine, excuse me.
yeah, absolutely. You are completely right. And this is not Ukrainians' fault that Russia was trying to erase Ukrainian national identity for centuries. Russia was an empire and Russia is an empire. And the empire always wanted to have Ukraine under its control and to erase everything that is Ukrainian. So it took like a lot of effort for Ukrainians to preserve their language, their culture, literature, and everything. Russia is all the time boasting about how great Russian culture is, but it's because they killed Ukrainian writers en masse. They took them to the gulag, and there then they were executed. This is the reason the Ukrainian culture was not as much popular as the Russian one. So Russia, even before the war, was trying to erase everything, and it's during the Soviet time the same. Russia wants only Russian language and Russian culture to dominate on everywhere where they have control. They're doing the same now in Crimea with the Crimean Tatars, which are the population there. With Ukrainians, there is no Ukrainian language in. You cannot learn it in Crimea if you stay there for now during the occupation. So that's what was Russia doing. And in fact, you are completely correct, Terrell, about saying that it's Ukrainians are getting back to their roots even more, because this is now the way for us to show that we are more united. So you fight us, you throw bombs and missiles at us, but we don't, like, as you said, give a fuck about you. We will continue fighting and resisting, no matter how hard you try, because we are stronger and because we are fighting for our land. And this is why many people turn to their origins. The Ukrainian culture is actually blooming now. There are like bookshops open with only Ukrainian books. There are theaters with Ukrainian plays, cinema with Ukrainian movies. Ukrainian documentary has just won Oscar, the 20 Days in Mariupol, the first Oscar for Ukrainian documentary. So this works for Ukraine as a factor of unity, all what Russia does.
Yeah, I find that interesting, so interesting, because I could tell you what Ukraine was like before. I've been going to Ukraine since 2008, right? And I live in Ukraine half the year. So I actually saw this transition. One of the things that I noticed, particularly as being a foreigner who lives in Ukraine, is that I never saw so many Vyshyvankas worn in my life. It's just like a common thing. I even wear them now. I have like 5 or 6 of them right now because I kind of joined the crowd, right? But I saw all the Vishivankas, and you're right, the cinema, the arts, and anytime I go to a new city or do some work for my YouTube channel, that's one of the things that Ukrainians tell me. Check out our artists and our writers, and it's some trip to the museum where people talk to me about this, and I'm like, well, wow, like I never saw this type of energy before,
Yeah, the,
and I I think it's great, and I have people whose Ukrainian was not as good as they wish it was. And then now they've just said, I refuse to speak any Russian at all. And even if I have to stumble through my Ukrainian, that is what I'm going to do. I remember being in a restaurant, um, and I was trying to practice my Ukrainian by ordering something to eat. And you know that in Ukrainian, there's the huh, in Ukrainian, and it's one of those things I pick up. And so you in Russian is я хочу, and then Ukrainian is я хочу,
yeah, that's right. You are
right?
very good.
Right, я хочу, right? And I I started off saying я хочу. I thought I said я хочу, but for whatever reason, this waitress, I guess it sounded too much like Russian. And she was like, no, I'll just speak to you in English. But my whole point of it is that that's what this war has done, right? And if you're not so, and so part of my work when I come to the United States is talk about those small but very important cultural nuances. And so when people talk about this whole approach to peace, my response is the most progressive moral thing that you can do to support Ukraine is to give them as many weapons as possible to protect themselves against these genocidal maniacs that are trying to take over their land.
Thank you, Terrell. Yeah, that's the greatest thing that is like so important for Ukrainians.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to ask you about the critical infrastructure and how Russia attacks, energy facilities, and I made my visit to Zaporizhia, and you know that the Russians are occupying that nuclear power plant. And
Yeah.
so, can you just explain to us how these attacks on your critical infrastructure, mainly energy, how does that challenge the lives of everyday Ukrainians who aren't even fighting?
Yeah, this is one of the most terrifying things that Russia can do and that Russia is doing. So just if we go to the recent missile attack, there were like about 100 targets flying simultaneously to Ukraine from all over Russia. These were missiles and also Shahid drones, and they targeted almost every region of Ukraine. They specifically targeting power infrastructure, trying to completely cut off Ukraine of power. So like to put Ukraine into darkness completely. And because Ukraine does not have enough air defense everywhere, Kyiv is pretty good defended, but all the other regions are lacking air defense. So this made it possible for Russian missiles and drones to make it through, and many electricity facilities were hit, and the especially striking images and actually terrifying images were from Zaporizhia. In Zaporizhia, this dam on Dnipro, this is the largest dam in Ukraine, and this is the largest hydropower plant, and it was hit directly with at least two missiles. So the dam was not destroyed because it was constructed in the way that it can withstand attacks, but then it was damaged and it's not functioning. It's not like getting electricity through. So this means that there is a lack of electricity everywhere in Ukraine, and Kharkiv is already, it's like almost 2 days without electricity, water supply, and I just saw the videos of the emergency machines going around the city announcing air alert because the air alert system does not function. And this is the way Russia tries to use to put Ukraine into submission, because when they do not achieve anything on the battlefield or like a great success on the battlefield, some major success, they will hit civilians specifically because they know that civilians are more vulnerable to this kind of things, and then they think that civilians will, tell that probably it's we have to stop the war somehow. We are so like much exhausted, but it's just completely opposite. I've just recently been doing interviews with people on the streets, asking them how much and how long are you like prepared to live in the war, and everyone told me that they will live like they're prepared for the war as long as it takes. No one is going to surrender no matter what Russia does. And this is not even a question. And one lady, especially like very tough, she had tears in her eyes, and she said, "My son was killed. What did he die for? For what? Like we don't want this all this sacrifice to be in vain. We will continue and we will fight until our victory." And this is the mood inside Ukraine. But Russians actually don't get it. So I think that they will continue their attacks on civilian infrastructure, and Ukrainians have to be prepared for this because they are not going to stop.
Yeah, and this is something that I also have to explain to people here in the West. And you notice my perspective is all about how do I translate, and help people to make what you're talking about even more relatable to my people here in the United States, right? And you know, one of the things that I hear about, because I operate in more progressive circles, right? Is when they talk about this whole conversation about possibly ceding land, which I totally think is a very ridiculous idea. But I told people that, following up with what you said, that if Zelensky were to go to his people and say, why don't we make some agreement, and he would talk about ceding land, the Ukrainian people, you all would revolt. There would be another revolution, and they would replace them with somebody who will continue to fight. Is that a correct analysis of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for your, again, for all your incredible job to like telling people in the West, because you know the society better and you know how to like explain everything. But it's like it completely is up to the point, because this is like you have to realize, I mean, not you, you know that, but people with whom you talk, right? People who will be watching this, you have to realize that every Ukrainian has something personal, some personal losses connected with the war. Someone lost a family member, someone lost a house, someone was displaced because of the war. So there is a lot of like for everyone connected with this war. And then you want like a normal human being, you want to win, because otherwise what you were been fighting for all this like 2+ years, you want to see the result of your fight, and the result for every Ukrainian is victory for Ukraine, restoration of the borders of 1991, when Ukraine gets back everything, all our lands. This we consider to be a victory, and this is what the consensus of the Ukrainian society is. And Ukrainians will never ever like say yes to any kinds of agreements that will not foresee the liberation of the territories. And what is more important, it's not only liberation of territories. Think about all those people who live under occupation now. I have been to Kherson. Part of the region, as all of you know, is deoccupied, including Kherson, but part of Kherson region is still in occupation, and some people have family members living under occupation, waiting to be liberated. So there are people who wait for Ukrainian army to come and to liberate and push out the Russians, throw them out of Ukraine. So what we have to tell these people, that we are now in some kind of, peace talks moods, and that you can live under Russian boot and endure Russian tortures and everything what is connected in the occupation. I can be a little bit long, but this is like very emotional thing for me. I've been in Sumy, where there is the only border crossing from Russia into Ukraine, and I have met a family that were just coming from Melitopol, a city on the Black Sea, not far from Mariupol, which is under occupation. So they were saying that they were really afraid that their older son, who is turning 18, Ivan, that he will be conscripted into Russian army, and that they will put him to fight against his fellow Ukrainians, his brothers. He speaks Ukrainian perfectly, and was the one reason they decided to run out of there. The second reason was they were always living under oppression. They were always hiding at home, afraid to go out, not to see Russian soldiers, and not to get into some kind of conflict with them. So he was listening in his airports Ukrainian music and everything, trying to hide that he has access to this. And when he went outside, he wasn't taking any gadgets with him, so that Russians won't find out that he has some connections, or he can actually use and see Ukrainian internet site.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I definitely understand that. And one of the reasons why Ukrainians are resisting is because they can. And so the Ukrainian military has made incredible strides since 2014 when the first invasion occurred. And I want to talk to you really about why the Western intelligence got Ukraine so wrong on this second invasion, thinking that the country or the city would fall within 3 days or a week or just a short period of time. So, what have been your observations of the ways in which the Ukrainian military have improved their capacity to defend Ukraine?
Yeah, this is a great question, and thank you for it for touching upon this, because actually I think that if Ukraine would have more weapons at the start of the invasion, probably we would not see such awful consequences and aftermaths, like we probably won't see Bucha massacre or everything else around Kiev, because Ukraine would be able to stop Russians. But then probably the reason for that was that Western leaders were thinking that Ukrainians will not try to, they were thinking that the Ukrainians won't be able to withstand Russian aggression. And they were thinking that it will turn into some kind of partisan war, into some kind of subversive activities, that after the parts of Ukraine will be occupied. So by stopping Russians where they stopped them, Ukrainians showed the remarkable resistance and remarkable ability to fight with the limited resources. And the battle for Hostomel, for example, is a historical battle, which shows that how, like, even with a smaller number of people, how you can stop the huge army with the columns of tanks, helicopters, and everything Russia threw into Ukraine. So this is at one point very sad for me to realize that Ukraine didn't have enough weapons, and probably if we would have it, then it would be possible to prevent what has happened later. But the good thing is that now the Western leaders see what Ukrainians are capable of, and they send Ukraine the weapons it needs. It comes like in a much less and limited numbers than needed, and much later than needed, but still it comes. And I don't want, anyone in the West to think that Ukraine is not grateful and Ukrainians are not grateful. Ukrainians are grateful, and they appreciate this like aid and military aid. Uh, but we need more. And we need more not for our sake, not only for us, but we need more to stop Putin where he is and to throw Russians out, because this is not the like mere words that Putin will go further. He will. Russia is preparing for this. And listen to someone like me or Terrell and other Ukrainians who tell you that they will go further, because he is not going to stop just on Ukraine. And then NATO countries will have to fight him on their land. So before this happens, let's stop Putin and throw Russians away from Ukraine.
Why do you think many people in the West don't believe that Putin will go further?
I think they probably think like they fall into this kind of mistake when they think that if we like feed the aggressor what he wants, then he will be satisfied with that and he will just stay where he is in peace. Because I don't actually, I try not to think that anyone in the like anywhere actually believes what Putin says, because everything what Putin says is a lie. It's just the thing to know, and to there is no doubt in it, or like do not believe anything what comes out of his mouth, because he was always lying everyone in their faces. Like days prior the invasion, he was saying that Russia is not going to invade and all other kinds of lies. So he is not actually telling the truth. So taking this that we cannot no one cannot believe what Putin says, and then looking at what he is doing on the ground, he is erasing like the largest country in Europe right now. Why would you think he will stop here if he sees and actually tests what is the response? So after he sees that he succeeds, if this happens in Ukraine, he will realize that he can go further. And Russia is planning that. Russian propagandists openly discuss how they will invade Poland, how they will invade Moldova, how they will invade Baltic states. Russia was already occupying Baltic states during the Soviet times. What makes people think that they will not go after them again? They will. It's just a matter of time and the matter of if the West will be united and will show Putin that it's not going to work, and not stop Putin and throw Russians out of Ukraine. This is the only way. Militarily defeat of Russia is the only way of how we can stop that.
One thing that we learned after this second invasion in 2022 was Ukrainians can fight. So I'll tell you that these European Union candidacy status that Ukraine has, and the NATO alliance saying collectively we can see Ukraine as a NATO member eventually. None of this was happening before 2022, in February of that month. No one was saying that Ukraine would be a candidate country at this point. Nobody was talking about this idea that Ukraine is arguably the strongest military in all of Europe, even without all the sophisticated Western weaponry. It was Putin's attack that exposed all of this. So I believe in large part that had Putin just laid back and kind of left Ukraine in this kind of limbo per se, not limbo, I think that's the wrong word. It's the what if type of environment, right? Or the we don't know. But when Ukraine was tested, it showed that, wow, Ukraine is a lot better and far more ahead than we thought it was. And so, because of this attack, NATO, Russia actually accelerated Ukraine's eventual path to the EU. Before, we didn't know, we thought about it. Now it's certain.
Yeah, that's a true thing, and it's also important to understand that Ukrainians feel part of Europe, feel it, feel part of Europe since the revolution in 2014, when Ukrainians went out on the streets protesting against, closer ties with Russia. That was the time when Ukrainians said, "Stop! We had it enough. We don't want to have anything in common with Russia. We have our own way, and this is the way to Europe, to be part of NATO." This is how Ukrainians feel. They don't feel themselves as the part of some kind of Russian world. What is it in the image of Putin and the other, like Russian elites in Kremlin? They
Ruski
don't
mir.
realize it for a second, and this is why all these steps that were taken after Putin invaded, showing Ukrainian that they are welcomed in the EU and that Ukraine will be in the EU. They give Ukrainians like this hope that at some point we will be together with the countries we feel we belong to. And unfortunately, like millions of Ukrainians had to flee to Europe, but also they are now part of the European society, and Europeans can see with their own eyes that this is the people the same as them are. So they are like completely very well educated. They can work hard. They have the same kind of traditions, culture, and everything. They can like be very much into European culture and into European way of life. So like this is the time has come to invite Ukraine and to for Ukrainians to be part of where they belong.
So, when I was reporting on Ukraine in 2014, and this was I was interviewing people from the Poroshenko administration, and they were telling me literally that they were a military on paper. That was their literal words to me. And I remember doing one story about Ukraine's military reforms for BuzzFeed back when they had a legitimate newsroom. And they said that their military, even though it was not as terrible as people said it was not remotely where it is right now. So, what were some of the major reforms that the Ukrainian military what did they undergo in order to be this fighting force that they are today?
Well, I think the greatest, the most remarkable transformation and development were made already during the war, during this the big invasion since 2022, which makes this even more remarkable because developing during the war is much more difficult than developing during the peacetime. So the technologies the development of technologies is just remarkable, and especially the productions of drones. And there are like several reasons for that. One reason is that drones generally became a game changer in this war, but we have to admit that Russia is developing their capabilities quite rapidly, and Ukraine has to develop as well to be able to fight back with that. But also the other reason is that Ukraine is not allowed to use Western weapons for strikes inside Russia. And because Ukraine is outgunned, for, then striking Russian oil depots, striking Russian military infrastructure in Russia becomes one of the ways of how Ukraine can change the pace of the war. And for these strikes, Ukraine has developed the long-range drones, so to say. They're like drones that can hit as deep as 100 kilometers, which is about 500 miles deep into Russia, hit military infrastructure, military airfields, air depots, and things like that, which like completely diminish the Russian logistics capabilities. So this was not something that we could have imagined happen before Russia invaded, but Ukraine did develop these capabilities, and these are mostly private owned companies that produce different types of drones for different types of tasks. And also we have seen the very successful usage of sea drones attacking Russian sea fleet, very successful operations. And actually Kerch Bridge is ahead of us. So this is something, the most striking example, the military drone production from what Ukraine has done so far.
Now, you do have these great drones that are able to strike 500 plus miles into Russia, but I'm pretty sure that you all would prefer attackums that would be able to have the highest capacity and with the traditional warhead as opposed to the one with the with the in the word evades me with the munitions inside. I'm sorry, I forgot this term, but we would definitely prefer the Taurus and the attackums. And so I'm just curious, why do you think that um Chancellor Schultz, for example, is so reluctant to offer the Taurus missile?
Yeah, great question. Well, it's obvious that Scholz is afraid of Putin using nuclear bombs as a retaliation strike, or generally as like as the way to if Ukraine gets Taurus or other long-range missiles and uses them into Russian territory. So, but this is like this logic is not true, because Putin has already used everything he can, and he will not use nuclear weapons against a NATO country just because he probably realizes that Russia will not survive in this kind of war. And speaking like acting from the logic of not provoking Putin proves to be wrong, because this, on the contrary, shows Putin his impunity and that he can do whatever he wants. And he all the time tests the limits to where he can go, and not providing Ukraine Taurus or other long-range missiles, and not allowing Ukraine to use them to hit military targets inside Russia. It only makes the war longer, and it allows Russia to like hit more harder and to attack more violently. So there is no point in that, but unfortunately, this is the logic from which like some Western countries act. They still think that if we do something that will provoke Putin, then he will throw, nuclear bombs. But Russia is already occupying, as you perfectly know, because you have been to Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, where they can, like any moment, start nuclear disaster. They have hit Kakhovka Dam last summer, just flooding thousands of square kilometers and damaging the huge ecosystem, not only in Dnipro, but in general in the Black Sea. So he is already using means of mass destruction. Why would something provoke him more to use nuclear bombs? He will not use it just because he knows Russia is not capable in the war with NATO. So NATO just has to show Putin that they are strong and that the Putin's strategy is not working.
Which goes to the next question: how should the West respond to Putin's nuclear threats? Because they come from his mouth at times. Recently, he made another one, which is about his 11th or 12th. And then Medvedev, who Ukrainians call the drunk uncle, he talks about it all the time, right? So, and what I find interesting in Ukraine is that Ukrainians are kind of like, meh. And I'll never forget, I was on the way to a nightclub in Ukraine one time, which again shows you like society in Ukraine just kind of is operating. I was in Kiev, and a soldier I know just very casually said, our commander says that there's some serious um, possibility that the Russians may use some type of nuclear or biological attack. You want to come by my place and get some salt pills or whatever he was offering. It was just very casual, right? They're like, I've heard this before. I've been here. I've done that, and so the Ukrainians are not taking Putin's threats nearly as seriously as the West is. Why do you think that is?
Oh, that's a great one, but a tough one. Well, I think it's because Ukrainians realize that Putin's aim is to completely wipe out Ukraine, right? And he already used everything he could. He used cluster munition, chemical weapons. He bombed Ukrainian dams, power plants. So, what if he would think that nuclear would help him? He would have already used it. So, if he is not using it, this is not because he has not been provoked enough. It's because he thinks that this is not effective and that this will not help Russia's war. Otherwise, he would have already used it. And I think that's important to realize that for Western governments, and I think some of them do realize it, that you can't provoke Putin more. So the only way, how you can help, you can provide more weapons more quickly. This is the way. And this is the only way to stop Putin. And we have not to be afraid of his nuclear threats, because these are threats. And we have to show the Western response has on these threats has to be more unity, more weapons sent to Ukraine, and more support for Ukraine. That's the only way, because otherwise, looking at him, other countries like North Korea, which is already supplying en masse missiles to Russia, which it uses to bomb Ukraine, Iran, they will all look and say, hey, that's working. Let's do the same. Let's threat also with using nuclears, and no ask for that and that, or probably we will invade some other country because we can. So the only way to stop terrorists is not to give them what they ask for. That's how it works.
Absolutely. And I watch a lot of Western experts who have actually spent much of their career focusing on Ukraine, not Ukraine, but Russia. And I think one of the fundamental problems is that we have generations of experts in the highest levels who understand Russia, but they don't understand Ukraine. They don't understand the Caucasus. They don't understand Central Asia. And so it's almost like a side part that they specialize in. So these people spent the 1980s and the 1990s going to Moscow and St. Petersburg and Samara studying Russian, and those are there, and it's almost like they look at it back with some nostalgia, so to speak, and they and they speak a lot about Russian humiliation at the end of the war, not the war, but the Soviet Union falling, that the Russians felt humiliated, right? Not the or the Soviets felt humiliated, and my reaction has always been who was humiliated, and you're talking about the Russians because the Ukrainians felt liberated, the Kazakhs and the Lithuanians and the Estonians and the Georgians, they didn't feel humiliation, they felt liberation. And so much of the way in which Western experts, particularly those who spend much of their time focusing on Russia, look at Putin is that it's like power, because we in the West, the Western powers have their own history of colonialism, right? And so it's a power to power thing. And so, and it's very top down. And I feel like it's a way in which these Westerners are like, okay, you got to understand Russia's perspective here. And I think that also leads to miscalculations. I feel like there's like a cultural misunderstanding of Ukraine, that their Russian expertise and their Russian on the ground experience really prevents them from understanding. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the perfect point. And actually, the war played another role in, other countries uh, like noticing what Ukraine is. Like, for example, take Germany. Many of the top German media had their offices only in Moscow. So their Moscow correspondent will cover what was happening in Ukraine, even after Russia already occupied Crimea, even after 2014. So this has changed. And now many of the media have their like normal presence in Ukraine, and their Ukrainian correspondents are covering what is happening in Ukraine. But you're completely right about that. Some people in the West, they like still look at what is happening, so to say, through Russian optics, and Russian optics is Russian imperialism, which Russia never put aside. And they always wanted the restoration of Russia as an empire. And even when prior the big war, I talked to some Russians. They were telling me, when we put down Putin and his regime, we will again be with Ukraine brotherhood nations. And I told them, no way. Thank you very much. Like, let's put a border between our countries, and we want to be part of the Western society. We want to be part of Europe. We don't want to be part of your Russian empire anymore, and of your Russian culture. Leave it for yourself. Leave it for Russians, and leave other nations live in peace. And they don't realize it. And this is a very good point, especially as we call them in Ukraine for good Russians, right? Russians that oppose Putin regime, because they never tell what they will do after, and if they succeed in Putin in toppling down Putin's regime down. What will they do? Will they pay reparations? Will they give back Crimea? Will they deoccupy the Ukraine and other countries and territories Russia is occupying? Are they ready to put aside Russian imperialism and live peacefully in Russia, just not like taking other countries and not threatening them? So that's the good question. And I think that those in Western think tanks that look at this as a Eurasia, which Russia in the center of this, they are like wrong in general and how they see the situation, and that probably causes a lot of problems.
I remember being in certain think tank communities, and especially those who were supporting Navalny, because I think there, when you look at him, and Navalny is a part of the good Russian paradigm, and the opposition, and I think there's a difference in saying that no one believes that this man ought to be dead versus the fact that he himself had an imperial mindset, and much of the Russian opposition as well. You would be surprised that in several meetings that I've had with different think tank people, that the black dude, would be taking the Ukrainian side and saying that you all have this image of Navalny that does not exist in anywhere that I've been in Ukraine. And I feel like I can say it because I've literally touched every piece of land or been in most places in Ukraine. And I haven't met one Ukrainian that shares Westerners' optimism about who Navalny was or what his movement can be. The reason why I think that is, and I don't know, and this is something about my country that Maria and a lot of you and many Ukrainians may not be aware of because, I cover race and I cover systemic racism in this country. And what I find to be a problem with Westerners who take on this, the good Russian and the Russian opposition point of view is that because they don't understand equity and oppression in their own country, they're not going to identify it in yours you know they've never had to sit down and think maybe my point of way of looking at it can be wrong because they're so used to people telling them that they're right. I referred to Navalny at the time as Slavic Jesus, and that comes from a very a black tradition of how in American history, we had boxers who became the first black heavyweight champion of the world, right? And then when that boxer like Joe Louis, for example, would beat one white opponent after the other, the media put together what they would call a great white hope. That great white hope would put this black champion in this place. The way that I look at how so many folks looked at Navalny versus Putin was that you have to remember too that a lot of these Western scholars who tend to have this favorable view of the opposition, many of them are not allowed to go back to Russia. They have been banned from going in, and so what Navalny brings to them is a possible opportunity to take down the person that has restricted them from going back to Russia, going back to their old college days of when they saw the Russia that made them feel good, right? And so it's a very nostalgic thing. And they saw Navalny, who is their Slavic Jesus, as the person that was able to do it. Now, this sounds crazy. This may sound crazy to a lot of people, but I'm pretty sure that I'm right about it. Because in these meetings, when I would challenge folks about what the Ukrainian position was, let me be very clear with you. They'll tell you on one end that they're pro-Ukrainian, but when it comes to listening to you all's real concerns about Navalny, they don't listen to you because it disrupts their narrative and it makes them feel uncomfortable about dealing with the colonialism and imperialism that you all are talking about. And so that's just my reflection of it. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I think that's one of the reasons that I observe with them. And so they have to really, you're talking about the Navalny's of the world to decolonize their own minds, but the Westerners, in order to understand Ukraine, they have to decolonize their own minds as well, particularly how they have to break from their Russian optics and understand Ukrainian expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, Russia is becoming more and more a racist country with the years. And I just started, to look at the discussion on the Russian social media about the horrific terrorist attack in this concert hall. So what they discuss is like they post awful, like terrible racist comments on the ethnicity of those terrorists. So it's not about they speak, like they discuss the attack itself, but they like the only topic they concentrated is their race, and this is what is Russia is becoming. They're becoming a fascist state which allows only like Russian culture, white people, and of the special race that are the good ones, and everything, all the other, they are just not fit into this perfect Russian world, including all this Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Caucasus countries, which they use derogatory words to like portray them, and this is becoming more and more in Russians' mind, because they are more and more concentrated just on them, on themselves as the Russians, with other like nationalities are being wrong. And this is what Nazis do, and this is why I say that Russia is more and more racist than ever.
And they also have very derogatory terms for Ukrainians as well. Lots of them that are very ethnic discriminatory terms about Ukrainians. So I want to close out by asking you about what your life was like, has been since the war, since the second invasion started, because you spend a lot of your time talking to people like me and telling people and documenting these war crimes. So I just want to ask you about what it's been like to document these war crimes and to really talk to people like me about your country. And even though you see people that there are people that that have been killed. I just want to talk more about the work that you do and why you continue to do it and how you keep yourself going, with all this horror happening.
It's so good that people like you, Terrell, and others who are the true supporters and true friends of Ukraine do also this job. And I think this is a very important job in telling the world what is actually happening. Because information war is even probably like not less important than the war on the ground. Because if it not would be for you or other people who like tell what is happening, Russia will silence everything, put Russian propaganda and disinformation everywhere they can reach, and that's it. No, so that was also one of their goals and is their goal, so that people will not hear and understand the truth. So the I see my mission to telling what is happening in reality, and this is why I double check everything. I try to go to the people and to report from the ground, so that people see with their own eyes and make their like personal decisions and see like what Russia is doing to Ukraine. And I think this is very important to combat Russian disinformation and Russian information warfare, uh, to explain and to show. And I've been doing this since Russia invaded, because before I was a disinformation expert, mainly writing research papers. But since Russia invaded, I changed my focus, and it became very important for me to show from the ground, from the like as much information as possible from the atrocities Russia is committing in Ukraine, because they didn't succeed in this. Because in the first initial days and weeks, it was obvious they were trying to accuse Ukraine of bombing Ukrainian cities. They still do it those days. They, after every strike, they still continue to put Russian disinformation to somehow legitimize their attacks, saying that these were military targets or all other kind of lies Russia comes with. So the important thing is for everyone who is hearing us, please, if you like feel, if you see what is happening in reality, share this information, share information and voices from people from Ukraine and everywhere in the West whom you trust, because this is how we can combat Russian disinformation and stop it from spreading. Because Russian disinformation is very evil, and it has no boundaries, and it has no boundaries to stop in Ukraine. And we saw Russian attempts to like interfere in election processes and political processes everywhere in the world. So this is not only about Ukraine. This is like a total system of Russian propaganda and disinformation, which can be stopped by making people more aware of what is happening, showing them what is happening in reality, and telling them how threatening and terrifying disinformation can be, and to what consequences it may lead.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking time to talk to me because this is why I think it's so important to talk to people who actually are there. And I really take pride in talking about Ukraine with Ukrainians and showcasing Ukrainians. I like to tell people that I cover Ukraine like I would cover my own community, and I mean my black community. I spent the majority of my career doing black American media, and so I come from a tradition of black news newsrooms, and I feel like um, our media environment could really improve by really understanding the power of providing information and censoring the people who are actually dealing with things. And so I appreciate it after the 2014 um uprisings in Ferguson. I don't know if you're familiar with that. 2014 meant a lot of things for both of our communities. In Ukraine, it was the first invasion and of Russia. And for us, we had the killing of Mike Brown. And we have a big issue with police abuse here. And that really set me on my path to adding activism into my journalism and really telling the truth and centering the communities. And I take in the same approach that I took to covering my community during the Black Lives Matter movements. I bring it to Ukraine, and I feel like it's important for all of us to be morally consistent and seeking each other's liberation. And we could talk about what that looks like, but I'm really proud that the same passion I have for my community, that I bring it to Ukraine, and I like it when people do it for ours, because I think when you're really pursuing it that way, then that's what true liberation looks like. And I'm also happy that people like you who come on my platform and that legitimacy to it, because that makes the work that I do here in the United States even stronger. And I'm also happy for your resilience in the work that you do. And so when I come back to Ukraine this summer, I definitely look forward to seeing you, and I'm going to be telling everyone about the great work that you're doing. And I'm just looking forward to people seeing this so they can see a real conversation of what it looks like to support Ukraine and what it means to have a larger conversation about supporting one another.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for all the terrific job you are doing for Ukrainians, Terrell. This is something like not only from me, but from everyone in my country, because this is so important to see your efforts and how you support Ukraine. And you are true, like so true in saying that you do it like you would do it for your own country. This is something remarkable. And this gives us strength. When you see people like you supporting Ukraine and given everything you can for this support, then it like brings us realizing that we are not alone, we are united, and it gives like this hope that we will win. And it gives like wins and all the support we see. And thank you for standing with Ukraine. And absolutely, I would welcome you in when you come in summer. It would be very great to see you.